Hello, Endeavor here. One of the biggest tragedies of the human experience in the modern world is alienation. People today more than ever before feel alienated from the society around them, cut off from the things that make their lives meaningful and fulfilling. It's a problem that's been building for decades, possibly even over a century, but has become much more real in the last couple of years. As the elites who rule over the modern world are reshaping society for a new globalist age, people everywhere are seeing their places in the world and their ways of life through which they derive a sense of belonging and fulfillment destroyed. And the feeling of alienation which this has resulted in is at best being ignored by the powers that be, and at worst is being declared a dangerous conspiracy theory or hatred. So we really have a hard time expressing or even understanding this modern anguish which is felt by so many around the world. There's a classic film, one of my favorites, released at a time when this issue wasn't clouded by ideology, which I believe is able to capture the heartache of alienation. It may have just been fiction for audiences in the 1930s, but the premise of the film is based on a problem which has become a lot more real for people in the present day. Technically, it isn't one film that I'm referring to, but two. The 1937 French-language film Pepe Le Moko and its 1938 English-language remake Algiers. They are essentially the same movie. Algiers is almost a shot-for-shot remake of Pepe Le Moko, but with a different cast and in English. The endings, which I won't give away, are slightly different, but while there's two films, I think that they can more or less be considered one and the same. You can find both of them online for free. I'll provide links to both in the description. I first saw Algiers, the English language version, and then later saw the original, but you can decide for yourself whichever is more appealing to you. The title character of the original film, Pepe Le Moko, was played by Jean Gabon and co-starred by Mireille Balin. The remake, Algiers, starred Charles Boyer and co-starred Hedy Lamarr. It's interesting to note that Algiers was one of the main inspirations for the 1942 all-time classic Casablanca, which was written with Lamarr specifically in mind as the female lead, though she never ended up playing the part. Boyer's performance as Pepe Le Moko was also the inspiration for the Looney Tunes character Pepe Le Pew, funny enough. You know, the perverted French skunk from Bugs Bunny? Yeah, he was actually a parody of this movie. On the surface, Pepe Le Moko, or Algiers, is a crime thriller and a love story. But deeper than that, it's a film about identity and belonging, and the heartache that the loss of which brings about. The film takes place in Algiers, the capital of French Algeria. Pepe Le Moko is a notorious French jewel thief from Paris, wanted in every capital in Europe. After his last heist in Paris, he's escaped to French Algiers, where he has spent the last 2 years as public enemy number one of the French colonial police. Pepe takes refuge in the one place in the city where the police can't catch him, the Casbah. The district of Algiers is populated by native Algerian Arabs and immigrants from all over the world. Chinese, Negroes, Gypsies, Slavs, Italians, and more. For the French authorities in Algiers, the Casbah is a no-go zone, which they have little control over what goes on within. In the Casbah, Pepe and his gang reign supreme, dominating through their trade of stolen jewelry. The police often launch raids into the Casbah, attempting to apprehend Pepe, but they're always driven away by the lawless mobs which inhabit it. With their raids coming back fruitless, an Algerian police inspector named Slimane, one of the few officers who's able to enter the Casbah, plots to lure Pepe out of his refuge and arrest him once and for all. Though Pepe lives like a king in the Casbah with his gypsy mistress, he's secretly in deep despair. Pepe is not only a thief, but a man of culture. His place in the world is Paris, where he knows the streets and the local customs like the back of his hand. To Pepe, the Casbah is a prison. While he's at the top of his jewel-trading racket, he's surrounded by peoples, cultures, and a way of life which he is foreign to and which is foreign to him. He longs to be back in Paris where he feels at home, but the boundaries of his freedom where he can avoid arrest only extend to the edge of the Casbah. Pepe coincidentally comes across a young Parisian woman named Gabby who's on holiday in Algiers with her wealthy fiancé while she's touring the Casbah. Intrigued by their brief encounter, Gabby has Inspector Slimane bring her back to the Casbah to see the infamous jewel thief once more. Initially only interested in her jewelry, what enamors Pepe to Gabby is that she is Parisian. While trapped in a foreign land so alien to Pepe, Gabby is something familiar to him. Someone with the same shared identity, who knows the same places and is of the same culture. Something he has not experienced for the 2 years of his exile in the Casbah of Algiers. The two are drawn to each other. Gabby promises to return to Pepe again, and then again, To Pepe, she's not only a beautiful woman, but a piece of his beloved Paris. But Inspector Slimane realizes that he's finally found his bait to lure Pepe out of the Casbah and into the hands of the authorities. So he conspires to separate Gabi from Pepe. Unable to cope with the torment of his exile any longer, Pepe decides to make a break for it. He leaves his gang, his jealous gypsy mistress, in the safety of the Casbah for his chance to be with the Parisian girl whom he loves. Pepe Le Moko and its English remake Algiers are considered to be one of the best movies of the 1930s. For audiences at the time, the film wouldn't have been seen as political or making any kind of social commentary on wider society. At the time, it was just a fantastical, almost Shakespearean tragedy of an anti-hero, whose most natural of human desires led to his downfall. But today, it speaks to a certain kind of despair which has become known to millions of ordinary people in the modern world. One which is not only widespread, but deliberately ignored by those who control society for ideological reasons. Though this couldn't have been intended upon its release, the film goes against the grain of the zeitgeist of the present day. The premise of the story is that a French Parisian man is permanently separated from his Paris, trapped in the native quarters of Algiers. While he's materially wealthy and high status in the Casbah, the source of his anguish is that the land which he is imprisoned in is unfamiliar to him. But it's not only the separation from the city of Paris itself which pains Pepe, but that he is foreign to the population around him. So it's not only the geography, but the demography of the Casbah which he is alien to. Pepe is drawn to Gabi, the Parisian tourist, not only because she's a beautiful woman, but because she's of the same group as him. He says that being with her is like being in Paris. What this suggests is that his conception of the city isn't simply that it's a geographic location, but it's the people themselves who make it Paris. So belonging doesn't only come from being in one's place in the world, but being with one's people. The tragedy of the film is the despair one feels when separated from their people. This really goes against the modern values of multiculturalism and ethnic pluralism held in the West today. While I don't think it portrays any particular group in an unfairly negative light, it is possible that some progressives might consider the movie to be hate speech. The consensus among the reigning cosmopolitan intellectual establishment is that these differences between groups are superficial, and affinity for one's own group over others is conflated with hatred and bigotry. The doctrine of multiculturalism posits that the differences between groups residing in one area is a source of strength. While Pepe Le Moko or Algiers weren't intended as refutations of multiculturalism, the films predate the modern ideology by several decades. It does serve as a good critique of cosmopolitanism and the dissatisfaction it brings about. For one, its portrayal of the Casbah, the district of Algiers populated both by native Arabs and by sub-Saharan Africans, gypsies, various other Europeans, and more, is a lot closer to how such a place would actually be than the utopian vision of multicultural pluralism we're given today. The Casbah is lawless, low trust, and violent. It's similar to the situation found in many cities across the Western world today. Waves of mass migration from the Third World have turned what were once high-trust, cohesive, homogeneous communities into something resembling the Casbah in the film. Areas with no definable culture of their own, where no one really feels at home, and which are often plagued by crime. Paris is presented as the antithesis to the Casbah. In contrast to the chaotic and barbaric Casbah, Paris is civilized, cohesive, and has a definable people and way of life of its own. It's upheld as the pinnacle of the French European culture which Pepe belongs to, but which he's permanently separated from. The cosmopolitan values of the present day have put millions of people in a similar situation. The mantra today is that there shouldn't be places for certain people, but that we should all just be citizens of the world. But in reality, cosmopolitanism doesn't create pluralistic harmony, but alienation. It creates a world of deracinated individuals separated from that which gives them purpose, belonging, and fulfillment. And ultimately, that includes being with one's people. The process of globalization over the last several decades has turned towns and cities which once had unique characters of their own into soulless copies of one another, consistent in their blandness. And this has left millions with this feeling of alienation, being out of place in the society around them. Mass migration over the decades has obviously been a main contributor to this, but this issue has been even more exacerbated by recent developments within the last few years. A theme of the film is that not only is Pepe surrounded by a society which he doesn't fit into, he's trapped inside. He can't leave because he'd be arrested as soon as he tried to escape the lawless no-go zone of the Casbah. I can't help but draw the parallels between the new technocratic prison which is being constructed across the world today. Over the last year and a half, it has become commonplace for people to be forcibly isolated for months on end, cut off from normal, healthy social interaction with others. A new system is being created in which loneliness is being institutionalized. So in many ways, ordinary people today are being imprisoned in a new technocratic grid, like Pepe Le Moko in the Casbah. The film wasn't originally intended to address any societal issues that existed at the time. For audiences in the 1930s, it was just a tragedy of despair brought about by losing one's sense of belonging in the world, which people at the time took for granted. To do so, the film created a fantastical tale of a fugitive jewel thief. But interestingly, this fiction is a lot closer to the experience in the real world today than anyone in the 30s could have imagined. Perhaps the biggest tragedy of all is that Paris now resembles the film's portrayal of the Casbah much more than it does the idyllic image of the Paris of the 1930s, which Pepe longed for so much. Many old places which once had character of their own and which were meaningful to us might not be so for very much longer. But another thing that Pepe Le Moko or Algiers suggests is that if the sense of belonging that we associate with places in the world comes from the people, then it is within us. Meaning that while certain places might lose the meaning that they once had, with the right people that can be recreated anew. If that is true, then alienation doesn't need to be forever, only until a new home is built. If you want to watch the original French film with subtitles or the English remake, I'll provide a link to both of them in the description. I believe that good art is a reflection of truth. It's such a great movie because it was made to express a truth about the human condition. One which is buried by ideology today, but which everyone in the 1930s would have understood. Which is why it was so well received at the time. This truth is even more relevant in the modern day, so it's really worth a watch.
Aujourd'hui c'est merveilleux, je suis gai, je suis joyeux, je vois tout avec du soleil dans les yeux. Car je le dis sans détour, je viens, c'était bien mon tour de gagner de l'amour. Que faut-il pour être heureux dans la vie? Une poulette de
il y en a des bonheurs, c'est Pepe Le Moko.
tombe dans les bras. Et l'amour, ça vous fait voir tout en rose. C'est vraiment la seule chose dont on ne se lance pas. Voilà, on dira ce qu'on voudra. Que c'est tout dans ton affaire. La défense et le destin, envie du soir au matin. Les richesses et le luxe de leurs voisins. Si l'argent ça sert beaucoup, quand on m'en parle, voyez-vous, je réponds tout simplement, moi je m'en fous. Que faut-il pour être heureux dans la vie? Une poulette jolie qui vous tombe dans les bras. Il y a du nouveau. Et l'amour, ça vous fait voir tout en rose. C'est vraiment la seule chose dont on ne se lance pas. Voilà, on dira ce qu'on voudra, que c'est tout dans ton affaire.
If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe. If you're watching this on YouTube, please follow me on Odysee as well. My previous video was banned from YouTube, so it's important for us to support alt tech. You can follow me on Telegram, and if you'd like to support my work with a donation, you can do that too. All links are down below. Thank you for listening. Till next time, endeavor.